Hello and welcome to the screencast on strings in MATLAB. A string in computing language, and in MATLAB language as well, is a sequence of characters. Generally we think of a string as text as opposed to numbers and numerical data, which we have been using a lot of course, in our MATLAB screencast so far. We have seen strings in several places though. For example, when we do plots and we ask MATLAB to put a title on our plot, we use the title command, and inside the parentheses for that command we enter in some text enclosed in single quotes, and that text that we enter in is considered a string. This is a lot different than numerical data in a number of ways, and being able to work with strings is just as important in MATLAB as it is to be able to work with numerical data. So let's talk about strings for a little bit and how MATLAB handles them. Strings can be stored as variables, and we usually enter in the string value within single quote marks. For example, I can set up the variable name equal to my first name, single quote, ROBERT, end the single quote. And hit enter. It stores Robert in the variable name. Now look over here in the workspace and you see something a little bit different. It lists the variable name, but here instead of having a little grid, a little tiny yellow grid here, we have a yellow square with AB on it. So this is telling us that MATLAB is storing this variable as a string value and not as a number value. It's one important way to be able to tell what kind of variable you have is by looking at its icon in the workspace. I can also enter in something like greeting equals, again single quotes, hello world. So I can enter in longer strings and also store them as variables. And this is a little tricky. I can even enter in numbers, but instead of making MATLAB treat it like a number, I can make MATLAB treat it as a string. For example, if I enter in 42 encased in single quotes, it's going to store it not as the number 42, but as a string of text. Again, this is different than if I said x equals 42. Notice over here in the workspace now, 42 is listed as a numerical value, hence the icon here. So again, notice that num, the variable, is not a number. If I go to do something numerical with it, num plus 1 for example, it's not going to give me what I expected to get, which would have been 43 you would think, but since 42 in the variable num is a string value, it's doing something somewhat different. What exactly is that doing? Well, one thing you might want to know about how computers store information is that computers store string information, every character that you see on your keyboard, as a numerical value, but in a special kind of way. It uses a numerical representation called ASCII, A-S-C-I-I, for American Standard for Code Information Interchange. And under ASCII, every character on your keyboard, and even some of the elements of your keyboard that don't have characters for them, have numbers that correspond to them. And we can find out what those numbers are using the command double. For example, double of capital A, oh, I'm sorry, double, I have to put that in quotes. Double of capital A is 65. So you might type capital A and enter it in as a string, but the computer sees the number 65 underneath all that. And so even numbers entered in as string values have their own ASCII values. For example, double of the number 4 is 52. And now it makes a little more sense when you think about what's happening when I take num plus 1. It's taking the ASCII value for 4, which is 52, and adding 1 to it to get 53, and then it's also taking the ASCII value for 2, which is 50, and adding 1 to it. So that may be a little bit more information than we need for right now, but just realize the upshot of this is that strings and numbers are very different, and they're treated very differently in MATLAB. Now you might notice when I calculated that num plus 1, it actually gave me two results. The answer there up here was actually a vector, and that brings me to the one thing that you do need to know definitely for now about strings, is that just like everything else in MATLAB, strings are treated as vectors. For example, when I type name, remember that was Robert, MATLAB treats that as a 6-entry vector. The first entry, which is the capital R, the second entry is O, and so on. This makes strings awfully easy to work with. For example, I can type name, parenthesis 1, and it's going to return the first element in the vector. It works just like the referencing a single element in a vector. I can also use a slice here. I can just take the second through fifth letters out of that name, as you see here. I can even put them into a larger vector. For example, type V equals greeting name, and it will make a little greeting for me. It just concatenates them, puts those two strings next to each other. I'm just going to end off here by mentioning that MATLAB has many, many different functions that operate on strings. If you do a look for string, this of course will bring back every function in MATLAB that has string in the name of it or inside the description of it. And as this is piling up here, you can see there are a lot of things that MATLAB has on board already to work with strings here. Just to point out a few that might be fairly handy here. For example, the function upper converts a string to uppercase. So if I put upper greeting, that should spit out a very enthusiastic hello world. And there are also a lot of functions here for searching, matching, even a few for regular expressions, if you know what those are. So MATLAB has many powerful string functions built into it, and I would just encourage a nice thorough documentation search for whatever it is you're looking for. So that's it for this short screencast on strings, and good luck with these, and thanks for watching.